In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to finish your gathers like this. I call it the 3-to-1 method, and I find it gives a much nicer and more professional results than other techniques. Let's compare these samples so you can see for yourself. They all look the same from the right side, but from the wrong side you can see they're finished differently. Serging or overcasting your gathers helps prevent the raw edges from fraying, but it doesn't hide them. It's the most common seam finish you'll find in ready-to-wear. Using a French seam does hide the raw edges, but the result is a bit bulky because the gathered part is folded into the seam. Using binding gives a very nice result, but it takes extra time, skills, and supplies. Instead, the 3-to-1 method uses your fabric as a kind of inbuilt binding. You can see the gathers are fully enclosed without any extra bulk, which will give your project a super professional couture level result. So to give you a quick overview, the way it works is you basically sew your 2 layers wrong sides together, press the seam allowance up, then fold the top layer over the seam allowance, and sew again close to the first stitching line. I'll show you step by step. The most important thing with this method is you'll need to adjust your seam allowances. So for the edge you want to gather, you'll just need your regular seam allowance, but for the edge you're attaching the gathers to, you need to triple that seam allowance. This is why I call it the 3-to-1 method. This extra seam allowance makes it possible for the flat edge to wrap around the gathered edge. So let's say you're making a tiered skirt and your pattern already includes seam allowance. You'll need to add 2 more times that seam allowance to the bottom of each tier except the last one. Gather your piece using your preferred method. I like to sew 2 rows of gathering stitches with the longest stitch length and the loosest tension and without backstitching at any point. You can use whatever seam allowance you're used to for gathering. I'm tying the 2 spool threads together and the 2 bobbin threads together at each end and then gently pulling on the bobbin threads to gather my panel. Pin the 2 layers wrong sides together. This is very important. You have to make sure they are wrong sides together. Sew with your regular seam allowance. I'm giving you an example here, but you should use the regular seam allowance you planned for this project. Backstitch at the beginning and the end of that seam. Take your project to your ironing board with the flat side facing up. Good practice is to always press a seam flat first to really blend the stitches into the fabric. So I'm just pressing right on the seam from the top so I don't crease the gathers. Then open up the top tier and press the seam again. Flip your project to the right side. You can see the seam is pressed towards the top tier. Fold that top tier down over the seam allowance to enclose it and press the fold. Flip your project again and pin right below your previous seam. You need to sew just a hair below that fold, so I'm going to sew between my previous seam and my gathering stitches. Make sure you don't sew on the fold itself, otherwise your previous seam will be visible from the right side. I like to use a zipper foot to help me get as close as I can from the fold without sewing on it. Backstitch at the beginning and the end of that seam. Press the seam flat to blend the stitches into the fabric, then open up the top tier and press again without creasing the gathers. To finish, remove any remaining gathering stitches. You can see the gathers are laying nice and flat because they're not folded, they're just wrapped inside the seam. It works just as well when done in a circle. You can see here how I added a ruffle to a skirt. The side seams were finished with a French seam, so I just hammered the French seams a little bit to help minimize the bulk before sewing the ruffle on with the 3-to-1 method. If you like learning new techniques, you can like, subscribe, and check out my sewing pattern. And if there's any other seam finish or construction method you'd love a better solution for, you can share it in the comments and I'll try to answer it in an upcoming tutorial, or maybe someone else will have some tips for you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.